Test. Good evening, everybody. As we're settling in, we wanted to go ahead and get started. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but we had some brilliant angels sweep down and fix it. My name is Irene Newman, and I'm a volunteer parent ed chair with the Lake Washington PTSA Council. This is the umbrella group of PTSA, and we work together with the Lake Washington School District to put on parent ed events like this. And in fact, we'll be having a series of events coming up in the spring that there'll be one in January on suicide awareness, one on inclusion and diversity, communication, loving communication with your teen, one of my favorites, and several more. So be on the lookout for those. They'll be posted in January on our website, which is lwptsa.org. I wanted to also mention that we've got some resource tables out here. We have some folks from YES, Youth Eastside Services, from the foundation, the Lake Washington Schools Foundation Balance in Mind group. They deal in youth mental health, and from Changes as well. So on your way out later on, feel free to stop by and chat with them, as well as two of our Redmond Middle School counselors. Which is a real treat to have them and find out what's going on in schools. So also want to thank Redmond Middle School for hosting us tonight. Really appreciate that. And special thanks to Michelle Obenaus, the president of the Redmond High School PTSA, for making the arrangements for this group to present. So finally, I will introduce Vince Armfield, who is the pastor at Lakeside Christian in Kirkland. Vince has worked thoughtfully and tirelessly to bring this panel of experts together. It's a very unique panel, and again, we're just so pleased that you all are here. And without further ado, Vince.
Well, thank you, and I want to welcome you this evening to our Opioid Abuse Awareness and Strategies panel. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules at this busy time of the year to be with us tonight. We've come tonight not only to raise awareness and give you information, but our intention is also to give you strategies and tools for dealing with the information. It's very easy to get this information and get hyped up and get scared and think the world is, the sky is falling, but it's really important to know, where do we go from here with what's not only the information here, but what's been going on in our community for the last year and going back from there. You're here tonight because you want to be informed parents, you want to be informed friends, you want to be informed guardians, but you're mostly here tonight because you love your children. And we understand that. Each of us are here because we understand that love, and each of us are here because we care about your kids, and we care what happens to them. We've each seen trauma and grief that opioids cause in families and in our community, and we don't want this to continue. And it's our desire to come and speak to you as parents, as gatekeepers in your homes, to get in front of this so that you never have to deal with this on the other end of it. That's our desire. So together with you, we hope to make a difference and change lives and change futures. Tonight you'll hear from our panel a comprehensive presentation, and at the end we'll have time for questions and answers. You've each been given a 3x5 card, and those cards are for you to take notes. If someone on the panel says something that strikes a chord with you and you're like, hey, I want to ask a question about that, just write it down, and at the end we'll open it up for questions and answers. And I need to let you know now, you might be thinking, that seems like a kind of pedestrian or silly question. I can almost guarantee someone else is thinking the same thing. So please go ahead and ask questions, and we'll start discussion and engagement with the panel. Also, what we want you to do with those 3x5 cards is to write down your top 3, 4, but at least 3, your top 3 concerns as a parent. What is it that concerns you in the welfare of your child and raising your children? Because what we want to do is collect those at the end, and those will become the basis for which we hope to do other panels like this. We don't want this to be a one-off type of thing, reactionary. We want to get in front of these issues, and as Irene mentioned, so is the school district, and trying to address pertinent information. So it helps us to know what you're concerned about so that we can best address those things. Otherwise, we're kind of thinking, well, as a parent, this would concern me when my kids are all in their 20s and going into the 30s. So you guys are at a great place to give us information. So your concerns matter. They really do, and we want to hear about them. So allow me to introduce your panel to you tonight. As has been said, I'm Vince Armfield. I'm pastor at Lakeside Christian Church. I was a youth pastor there and senior pastor over 25 years here in Kirkland. And I currently serve as the city police and fire chaplain for the city of Kirkland for the last 15 plus years. Next after me is Jim Whitney. Jim is a 27-year veteran of the fire service with 17 as a paramedic in King County, and he has worked with Medic One in various ways since 2006. John Ness comes to us from the Kirkland Police Department with over 10 years of service as a veteran of the police force, and serves not only as a drug recognition officer, an expert trained in that field, but he also is going to soon take on the role of a school resource officer. And then we wanted to have a personal connection, and Nick Stiant Brown has graciously agreed to join us. Nick is the father of 6 wonderful children, and he lost his daughter Georgia, a Lake Washington High School grad, to an opioid overdose. So we wanted to bring you into his home tonight. Dr. Jenny Harris is a doctor of clinical psychology, and she's unable to be with us tonight. She's under the weather, but she serves at Northwest University here in Kirkland and does intervention work in schools. And so we're going to be filling in for her a little bit here tonight. Some of the information we'll be presenting may overlap a little bit. It's not our intention to be redundant, but in these different fields, we all kind of overlap one another in our experiences, so you'll be hearing a little of that. Christy Nicholson is the Director of School-Based Behavioral Health Services for Youth Eastside Services, or YES, and works closely with the Lake Washington School District, and she is bringing over 20 years of personal experience in the field of working with students to our panel tonight. And Stephanie Mannion is the President of Changes Parent Support Network, which is a structured peer-led program that provides support to parents with children who are engaging in oppositional and self-destructive behaviors. So she comes tonight, she'll be batting cleanup for us tonight. And there are resource tables out here, so we want to give you stuff to put in your hands to take with you, because tonight is a little bit at times like drinking from the fire hose, and you're thinking, how am I ever going to remember all this? So if someone catches your attention, just remember who they were and what organization they represent, and there'll be time to talk to them privately afterwards too, but we hope that tonight will just be a first step forward. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Can I walk a little bit with this? Okay, close. Sorry, I don't like standing behind a podium, and I like to walk a lot, so I'm sorry about my voice. I've been teaching for the last couple of days, so I've been talking a lot, but hopefully it doesn't break down on us tonight. So, I think we have slides. Do I have slides? Awesome. Okay, so my experience is 27 years in the fire service. I've worked in small communities, large communities, and I'm fortunate enough to be in Redmond and have been since 2006 as a paramedic. Redmond paramedics serve all the greater northeast King County, so essentially north into Bellevue, around through the foothills of the Cascades to Bothell, with 3 medic units. So we stay pretty busy, and we see a lot of activity that relates to everything, but especially potentially opioids. The reason this slide's up there is because this is my team and what I consider my asset, right? They're my family. I'm fortunate to have 2 grown children, a 21-year-old and a 24-year-old. My daughter's a school teacher in Silverdale. My son's graduating Oregon State University, go Beavs, this spring, and headed to law school next year. So I share that because my wife, who's amazing also, is a school teacher for Sumner School District. And the reason I share that is that I'm very proud of my family. I had fear. I was a young father. We were very young. We didn't have a lot. We were learning to love our careers and grow into something we wanted to do. And we were scared to death about where we were going with our kids and if we were doing the right things for them. So far, it's been awesome. And we've been very open with our kids. We've shared, my wife's a 16-year school teacher. She shared her experiences that she's had in the schools and things she's seen as they've grown up and been at an age that they've been able to accept that. I haven't hidden anything from them in my career. I've shared with them as they've grown up the things that I see and the concerns that I have, and been very open with them. And I think that's so important. I don't know that I got it 100% right, but so far things are going good. So, my other team that I work with is my work team. And it includes fire departments from Redmond, Kirkland, Woodinville, Duval, Carnation, Bothell, Bellevue, and law enforcement and our chaplains that take care of us when we see the worst things that we see. We're fortunate to have that team, and it's family to me as well. And I share that because I want you to understand the impacts of not only on family, but the impacts from opioid overdoses on that team as well, because it's real, and you'll hear the stories tonight about the things that we incur and interact with that are so hard to view, and that's not so much about the patients, but it's about what families go through after the loss, like a tremendous loss. We work our area, kind of how we respond to opioid overdose specifically. Our first and foremost is scene safety, taking care of not only the patient, the family, ourselves, protecting ourselves with law enforcement involved as well, and making sure that's the first piece, because oftentimes we don't know what we're walking into. These events can have other things associated with them that are harmful. So that's number one. Obviously, we're there to take care of the families, and specifically with opioid overdose, respiratory management, airway management. Our BLS providers, who are your first tier response, those are the closest fire stations to your home, basic life support, they have been very well trained on how to manage airways and to take care of an overdose or any type of a problem, but specifically overdose for the night, how to manage that airway and to make sure that we are providing as much oxygen to the body as possible, because the opioid overdose wipes out the receptors that tell our body to breathe. And that's where we get in trouble, right? That's the first step of the trouble that we get into. We stop breathing, we stop oxygenating all our vital organs, including our brain and our heart. So there you have 750 subject matter experts in the Northeast King County area to manage airways, and that's their job, is to come in and do that. They will also give nasal Narcan along with law enforcement when they arrive, which we'll talk a little bit more about. That's the antidote, right? Reverses the effects of an opioid. So your responders that are coming to you to help, don't ever be embarrassed. That's our job. We want to come and help. It doesn't matter if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, 6 a.m., noon. We're here to help. We don't judge. We come in and take care of what needs to be taken care of, but we'd much rather arrive early than have you try and deal with it on your own. So please call. Don't hesitate at all. You're going to get responders that are well trained. They're going to take care of business. What's the frequency look like for us? You all are very fortunate. The demographic for which we live and the area up here in the Northeast County, I'm fortunate to work here because we don't see the frequency as big as we do in the south end of the county. But countywide, look at those numbers. Somewhere between 160 and 200 events, opioid overdose events, monthly. All right? That's a big number. Us here in the northeast portion of the county, 2 to 4 a week. It's not huge, it's still too many though. Those aren't just youth, that's adults as well. But it's a big number, and it's one that we can do better, and we need to do better. There's a lot of influence that causes that. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about that. Those influences sometimes accidental. So my son's a big baseball player, played baseball through high school, and in the process of that tore up his shoulder and had to have shoulder surgery right after he graduated high school. And that was one of those points in time for me that fear really hit me, because that is an introduction to, after those surgeries are done and recovering from the pain associated with that, opioids are in play, right? We're going to give them those medications to help get them through that pain that they're during the process of recovery. That's an exposure that is a potential risk, because what opioids do is they give you that euphoric high if you get too much of it and you're on it for too long. And it's unachievable to have that same plateau in the future. There's other options, and doctors are getting really good about playing with those other options. In super simple terms, Tylenol versus Advil, You can use those in combination with one another on a 2-hour window instead of stretching it out to 4 hours. And the whole concept of that, this is something not for me to tell you, but for you to talk to your doc. And what we're trying to do is eliminate the waxing and waning of the pain, right? We take medicine, within 30 minutes it feels great, everything's good. We're told not to take it again for 4 hours. 4 hours later, we're back into pain again, so we take more medicine. With the combination of Advil and Tylenol as an example, they work on different receptors in our body. You can take them still every 4 hours, but rotate them every 2 hours. Does that make sense? Gets us away from the opioid drugs, puts us in a place that it's something that we're not going to become dependent upon, and manages the pain. So we were super quick, paid a lot of attention to where Harper's my son, a lot of attention to where he was, and really got to a place where we can manage him as quickly as possible without the opioids in play. It's not always the answer, but it's an option, and that's something you should talk to your docs about. There is much bigger awareness now about that, and really managing, trying to keep people off, especially kids, away from the opioid drugs, or at least get them off of them as quickly as possible. The others, dependencies that we see, learned behaviors, acceptance, right? It's okay. They see people around them that are the people that have influence over them, whether they're family members or friends. They see them doing it, it's okay. Pop culture says it's okay. Peer pressure's out there. It's a good way to cope. Not getting great grades, here, let me help you out. I'm a pusher. So it's out there. It's definitely in our environment. And that's where I talk about the openness and sharing. Don't hide it from your kids. Let them know that you know, because they know. They're smart. They're aware of what's going on, and they only act like they don't know, I think, because they don't want you to know that they know. Right? The creation of addiction, it's an unachievable plateau. Sorry for the spelling, I missed that. I had already sent it, I couldn't change it. But it is an unachievable plateau. Once those receptors are hit the first time and get that euphoric high, you cannot get there again without increasing the amount, increasing the frequency, and that's where we start getting in trouble, right? That's where the high comes from, where now we start affecting respiratory drive, and we put ourselves in a position where we're not oxygenating our brain or oxygenating our vital organs, and that wind starts to happen, the wind down to potential death. Manufacturers, driven by money, they're putting different things in it to make it more potent so they can get more money for it. Another way to get it out there. We're unstable mixtures. They're mixing it now with fentanyl. Who's heard of fentanyl? It's big. It's 3 years ago, it all of a sudden hit our market. It's 100 times more strong. Potentially 100 times stronger than what is the normal here now. And they're getting tricky about it, right? They're packaging it as though it looks just like the same pill that you would have bought over the counter in the past, but now it's much stronger. It's poorly mixed when they mix it up. They may try and cut it down, but they don't. It's not accurately made. So some are really strong doses, and some are not very strong doses. So what will you see with opioid overdoses? What can you expect as a family as far as watching out for your kids or watching out for their peers or other things? Respiratory depression is the biggest thing. That's the thing that is most standout for us. You will see, we can go ahead and flip to the next slide, we will see pale diaphoresis secondary to the respiratory distress. You will see potentially incontinence of urine, incontinence of bowel. You'll see paraphernalia associated with it. If you see, looks like grinders that are grinding pills or crushing them. They get to a point where they want to increase the high. They might start going to a place where they're shooting it into the veins instead of taking it orally. So those are all signs. Plastic bags, spoons. I think the officer will probably speak more to this, but the things that we see as evidence around the scenes, and the fear of that is some of it, if it's got fentanyl in it, it can be airborne as well, and inhaled. And when it's inhaled, it has an effect not only on our kids, but potentially you as parents when you're just evaluating things that maybe aren't your kids, but their family or their friends. This is the part that's the worst, right? The shock and the grief. None of us expect to ever have to go through this. None of us ever want to go through this. It's profound. It's heavy to certainly the responders that are there, but absolutely more so to the family. The hardest part for me as a responder is watching the families go through this. Not because necessarily of a death, but just because of the impact of the first time. You can't get away from it. The desire is there, and it just keeps drawing them back. Our job as parents in loving our kids and taking care of them is be there for them, be present, ask them questions, challenge them, hold them accountable. Discipline is freedom, right? If they understand what's right and wrong, and we hold them accountable to that all the time, they're free to do whatever else they want to do. So things to think about as we go through tonight, things to think about that I always am constantly bouncing off myself. It's easy for us to get distracted with our lives, right? We have work, we have stress associated with that, we have financial issues, we have, you name it, the gamut, family issues, extended family, parents, grandparents. Make time for your kids. Be open. Share with them. Don't hide anything from them. Let them know that you know. Let them know that it's okay to talk about it. Ask them questions. And listen. All right? Be aware that just because we ask them, don't look for the answer you want. Look for the answer they're giving you. And be aware of that. It's a crazy time for us, as a nation. This is one of the most scary things, anything that impacts our children. Vince said it very well. We're here because we love them. That's our legacy, right? I measure my success based on my children's success. And I can't imagine experiencing the loss. Fortunately, I've never been there, but I've seen many, many people go through it. And it is heart-wrenching.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Corporal John Ness with the Kirkland Police Department. So a little bit of my background before I get talking to you tonight is I've been with Kirkland for the past 8 years, and I worked at a different law enforcement agency before I worked for Kirkland. Currently a drug recognition expert, so that's kind of where I'll be talking to you tonight. It's about the information that I can share about opioids, and I'm also going to talk just a smidge about vaping at the very end, because I know that's also very much become a concern for everybody, all the parents, myself included. Right now I work on patrol, but I will be rotating in as the school resource supervisor for Kirkland, as we'll have 4 new school resource officers to add to our 2 starting in January in our school, portion of the school district. So that, we'll get started here. The common abused opioids, right? These are the things that you hear in the news and you see, right? It's the morphine, heroin's the one we all hear about, right? Someone using heroin, injecting it, smoking it. But there are a lot of different opioids beyond that I'm going to touch on tonight. You know, your Dilaudid, your codeine, your hydrocodone, your oxycodone, your methadone, right, and your fentanyl. These are all terms we all hear from medical professionals, and some of us might receive prescriptions for them and all that, but these are commonly abused opioids. So they're highly addictive. There's no question about it. It is kind of the chasing the dragon moment that we just heard about, right? The first high is always the best high, and then you're always trying to regain that high. And it's a problem because these drugs supplement our body's natural functions to create happiness and joy and feeling well. It's replaced by a chemical, and then our body stops producing that chemical. And that, in turn, creates the addiction, because in order to just get feeling normal again, you have to take something because your body has stopped producing it. You have changed your body chemistry. Sorry, I don't have a clicker. Usually I have a clicker, so you'll see me flailing around, and I do apologize. So method of ingestion, there are quite a few. You can just click your way through them. Orally with pills, we see smoking, kind of the next step. And as we go through these are all very much kind of progressive stops. Usually they start in one spot and move their way forward. So usually people start with pills, start with some sort of oral ingestion, and they move to smoking them because it's a faster high. Instead of waiting for the ingestion, it goes through the nasal cavity, mucous membranes, and then the next one, it goes straight into the arm, right? You get injections. And we talk about transdermal usage. That really comes from like fentanyl patches and all that. It is a fear that's out there that if you touch some sort of fentanyl powder that you'll instantly start overdosing. I'll tell you, while there is a risk, it is not absolutely the case, as we can speak to from training experience that if you do get something on you that is powder, right, your skin is not an instant absorption. You know, you wash soap and water, you can get it off you. Do not use alcohol sanitizer though, because that can have its own effect. Warm soap and water is what we teach our officers when they're exposed to possible fentanyl powder. So, I really want to push tonight on pills, opioid pills, because that has been a significant increase, especially last time I presented at one of these panels, of where we've been seeing overdoses, especially in children. So to give you an idea about how many opioid pills are out there, right, this is from 2016, but these stats maintain the same. 3.3 billion pills were left unused from prescriptions. So people say, well, this is not our area, not our county, not our city. Keep going through these. But we just had in October 2 students overdose to death at Sammamish High School. And in the same week we had an overdose death at Ballard as well. And these weren't from kids doing heroin. These weren't kids injecting. These were kids who were taking what they thought were opioid pills, right? And they were an opioid pill of sorts, but they were a fake opioid pill. What you see on the posters out here, and you'll see tonight, what people refer to as Oxy 30s. And they're these blue pills. And they're fake. They're made mostly with fentanyl and pill binder, usually out of the country and then shipped in. Bought on the dark web. This is all coming from experience. I promise I'm not making this up. But they're all through the area. Click to the next one. So this package right here is one of my cases I recovered earlier this year. That is a bundle that had, I think, 26 pills in it, right? And the gentleman who I recovered this off of is very honest. I buy them over the web, I sell them to use. And where I encountered these was at an overdose scene, because they're a bad batch. As we heard about it earlier, their bad batches are mixed poorly pills. So the pills are created with pill binder and fentanyl, and when you buy like a prescription pill, they're all very controlled. They're mixing the drugs, everything in it. But these are done in someone's garage. So by in someone's garage, they dump a pill binder, they'll dump fentanyl powder, they'll mix it. Some of those pills might have no fentanyl, and some of them might be almost all fentanyl. And that's where we see these rushes of overdoses kind of all in the same span, because they're all from the same bad batch of drugs that made it into the United States. So where do juveniles get it from? This is kind of my harp to all of you, is the number one spot juveniles get these medications, any sort of opioid medications, usually from their parents. Not that you're giving it to them, but you had this surgery. Your knee was bad, your back was bad, you were in a car crash and prescribed them, right? And you didn't use them all. And you just put them in the cabinet, and then your kid goes rifling around and they take them. And they might not know that that's an opioid pill they're taking, they might just take them just to see what's in there. But kids do weird things, and kids do amazingly weird things when it comes to things they shouldn't do. Where else do they get them from? Friends, parents, obviously. Older friends, right? These are the kids outside the school system. You know, you're adults in their 20s, right, who might have access to the illegal pills. Parties. The amount of kids going to parties now, I'm sure we all say, our kids don't go to parties, but they do, right? They sneak out, they go hang out. What they do at these parties can be a range of things. And that's where overdoses can happen. Someone says, hey, try this pill, not knowing it's a bad pill. Or not knowing the kid has never even done an opioid pill before, and just a normal opioid pill might be too much for them. Low-level dealers, obviously, is the kind of next step, right? People who deal drugs, they're out there, unfortunately, and they prey on people, and they prey on the youth, because the youth make poor decisions because their brains aren't fully developed, they're impulsive, they want to be like their friends, and that's where the pills kind of get interjected into their life. And then usually it's combined with other drug use, right? I like legalization of weed and all that, whether you for it or against it, right? It's just, we see a lot of that encompassed in opioid use as well, right? We see the use of methamphetamine with a lot of our opioid users because they're afraid of overdoses. So methamphetamine is a stimulant, they try to balance it out. You see a lot of weed use, a lot of alcohol use. So if you say, oh, I just got my kid drinking once, but that's fine, it won't lead to other things. It's the time to have that discussion of, hey, right, these can lead to other things. Things can be gateways. Go to the next one here. So, what do you do with your pills? I always recommend this. Kirkland Police Department we have our own safe, secure, right in the lobby, you don't have to talk to anybody, medication disposal. But these are all over. You can go to the King County website and see them. There's 4 in Redmond. They're at the 2 QFCs, at the Kaiser Permanente building, and at the Health Force building here in Redmond. Right? There's also Kirkland Police Department has a few. The 2 QFCs, or the 3 QFCs in Kirkland have them as well. But these are places to take those pills, right? If you're prescribed them. Go, feel free, go nuts. Get rid of all those pill bottles you just threw in the drawer. Because the last thing you want is them to be out with your kids, right? Just because oh, I might need them someday. If you need them someday, then go get a new prescription for them. Don't let them hang around your house. So I'm going to talk a little bit about paraphernalia. The biggest paraphernalia you'll see with drug usage tends to be foil and lighters, and that's because a lot of people smoke the pills after the ingestion stops and they decide they want the quicker high. And this is what you're looking for when you see the foil. These kind of like blackish track marks. That's where the pill is, right? They're kind of holding on the lighter, they're chasing around the little tutor, which is, I'll show a picture of that in a sec. It's a little plastic tube used to kind of inhale. But the burnt foil, I mean, you find your kid's friend comes over and he leaves his sweatshirt and a bunch of little foil squares pop out, right? It's time to start asking questions, right? Who is this friend? How do you know him? Let your kids know what to look for. Hey, if you see this of a kid that you're hanging out with, right, ask questions. Make sure your kid knows. Sometimes children need the information to say, hey, what is this? Why are you doing this? Other things that are used are obviously baggies to carry the drug, syringes, needles, spoons, again for smoking, and then elastic tubing. I have a few more pictures of here of kind of like what we see in the field. So this is more for shooting up heroin, although again the tutors, which is the bottom straws on the bottom right, and the baggies and the foil for smoking, that is what you'll see with the use of pills. Because the idea is when you ingest a pill, it takes longer. When you smoke it, you get that instant high, kind of that instant rush from the drug. So we heard a little bit about signs of usage and overdose. This is just a quick slide for you guys to take a quick glance at of just things that the drug does to the body, right? Not overdose, but really just people who are under the influence of, right? On the nod is the most common thing you'll hear when you talk about heroin or any sort of opioid. That's because they're kind of in the zone. It's done what it does. It's slowed them down. They get kind of sleepy. They'll close their eyes. There won't be quick responses. They're enjoying the euphoria, unfortunately, of the rush they've created. And that's usually about 30 to 90 minutes into the usage of the drug. And then we get withdrawal. And with opioids, the withdrawal's pretty consistent across the board, every 4 to 6 hours. That's usually how long pills, heroin, other opioids are taken to digest and broken down and the effects wear off. And what we see in our world of law enforcement, or at least my world of law enforcement, is someone saying they're going to get well. That's kind of the code term. And that means they got to go get high again. Because their body is starting to say, hey, I want the chemicals to feel right, to feel balanced, and it has to happen every 4 to 6 hours. And this is where the addiction and then the criminality comes in as well. Because to afford something that you have to take every 4 to 6 hours gets very expensive very quickly. And your dosage gets more expensive. And this is where you start seeing property crimes around, right? Why is someone stealing cell phones? Why is someone breaking into cars? Why am I finding mail, right? They're all funding the same unfortunate addiction. So overdose. We heard a bit about what the overdose is and what it looks like. You know, blue lips, the blood's not moving, shallow breathing, convulsions, clammy skin. But to give you an idea about how strong fentanyl is, and carfentanil is another one that you'll hear that's coming out. The same dose of heroin that's the same dose of fentanyl, and then fentanyl to carfentanil. And as you know, it's carfentanil, how many grains there are? There's 2. right? So you can understand how like these drugs are very dangerous. They can very quickly cause an overdose that's hard sometimes to reverse. The naloxone, we carry our little sprayers. I carry mine on me that I can administer if I need to, a little nasal one. But these are a temporary thing, right? Because the drug's still there. There are people who've been exposed, especially to the fentanyl, that have to almost get a naloxone drip when they get to the hospital. They have to get continuous dosage of the drug to survive the overdose. So it is dangerous. And I can't help but stress, if you think someone is overdosing, to call 911. You have trained responders and police and then fire to get them to the hospital, get them the services they need. And it's the time to do it. Don't worry about crime or anything like that. I can tell you right now, there are good Samaritan laws here in Washington State. So if someone calls in an overdose on somebody else, right, and we show up and there's drugs and there's paraphernalia, that's not a time for us to be law enforcement officers. That's a time for us to be stewards of the community and help that person who is dying get their help. We're not looking to criminally charge. We will not criminally charge in those situations. So don't be frightened that your kid's going to go to jail because, right, you found him with drugs and he's not doing well. Nope, he's not. He's going to go to the hospital to get the treatment he needs. So fentanyl, I'm just going to briefly talk about this. It's a powder, so you hardly ever see it in its natural form. Usually it's mixed with something. The fentanyl lollipops are kind of what they give to burn victims, burn patients. You also have, I just show this because it just shows the creativity of drug dealers, as this is fentanyl bottle, even though it looks like weed, right? We haven't seen much of this up here, it's mostly in Texas, but it just shows you that, right? Not everything you think you find will be what it is, right? So if you find something that looks innocent, ask, right? What is this? Because if they can't give you a good answer, it might not be what you think it is. I mean, I've already spoken of this, so I'm not going to harp too much on opioid use and crime, but they go hand in hand only because it gets more expensive. It goes up and up and up. So I just want to talk quickly about e-cigarettes because that was a request for our panel. Vaping versus e-cigarettes. Does anybody here, the little interactive part, know the difference between the two? I see shakings of head, you don't? It's because there is no difference. There is no difference between a vape pen and an e-cigarette. They are the same thing, right? It's just a marketing ploy to get you to say, oh, vaping's not bad, it's not smoking, it's not an e-cigarette, right? But these are the models that we see right now. You have the tanks, kind of like the less expensive models. You have the rechargeable units, Juul. Well, I'll talk a little more about Juul here in a sec, but that's kind of the main brand one. And then the disposable e-cigarettes, which are kind of like the one-offs. So again, what is an e-cigarette? It's a device that heats a liquid to a vapor, lets you suck in that vapor, right? And that's where the problem begins, because the boiling point of water is very high, right? So it's not water vapor that are in these things. Go to the next one. It's a glycerin, right? Something that's got a very low point to become a vapor. Something that can be powered by a tiny battery and a little tiny stick. So you can think, what's in that glycerin? Well, if I already have to tell you what glycerin is, right, that's a bad start. Right? There's a lot of chemicals, right? What happens to these chemicals when they get burned, right? And then they're being ingested into one of the most sensitive parts of your body, your lungs. So I like to tell people the vapor is never harmless, because that's what the excuse is. Oh, it's just like vegetable oil, right? It's just water vapor. It's fine. It's not. It's bad, if not worse than actual smoke. And that's where we start seeing other issues occur. I'll talk to this and then we'll get to that part in a second. This is the Juul. They make a couple different versions of it, but it plugs in. And people tell me, oh, the flavoring's fine, right? It's cotton candy. And then we start hearing about that. There's lots of legislation going right now trying to ban these flavors, cotton candy, raspberry, blue raspberry. What adult likes blue raspberry, right? They're not marketed for us, they're marketed for children. But Juul's parent company, Marlboro, big tobacco, right? That's the issue, is these are a nicotine product. They are selling nicotine vape pens. That's the whole idea, right? E-cigarette, a way to get away from smoking. So when kids are using these, they don't know. They think, oh, it's a flavoring. The CDC did testing on a random variety of pods, not just Juuls, but others. All of them had nicotine. Right? All of them were an addictive product being sold. And then there's lots of different issues with poisoning, right? So you don't know if they're off-brand pods, especially when kids are getting them. Nicotine poisoning is one I talk about, only because cigarettes have a finite amount of nicotine in them, right? What's the tobacco being burned? But with any sort of device where you control it, it never ends well. So every time someone takes a hit, depending on how well that pod was made, it could have a lot of nicotine in it, that hit could be like 4 cigarettes all at once. And that's just one hit off your vape pen. Right? You could burn through an entire pod or several pods in a day. And that could be equivalent to multiple packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine. You can understand where the addiction happens, health issues start to happen. And then I always like these headlines because I always tell people say, oh, not here, right? Well, that is what I hear a lot. Well, Redmond's a nice area, Kirkland's a nice area, we don't have these issues. These are all headlines from our local newspapers, right? It's a problem everywhere. It's a problem in the high schools, it's a problem in the middle schools. Our school resource officer at one of our high schools has a bin. And when I mean a bin, I don't mean like a tiny little bin, I mean like a big Rubbermaid clear plastic bin. He has filled with vaping equipment and vaping pods from this year. So 4 months in the school year, he's filled an entire Rubbermaid bin, taking off students. So it's everywhere. It's in the schools. It's something for you to be aware of for your kids, because the health, it's unknown. The effects of these are unknown, so please don't let your kids vape. Don't think it's an innocent thing. It will lead to other things, multiple health issues. So that's it for my time. I appreciate your patience. I tend to be long-winded. I will pass it off.
Hi guys, my name's Nick Stone Brown. I have to say that getting this panel together is like herding kangaroos, which is actually harder than herding cats. And Pastor Vince undertakes that task each time we do these evenings, and he has the patience of Job and extraordinary persistence, and so I want to thank him for that. There's nothing in it for him, let me tell you, but he's indefatigable in getting this thing going. My daughter Georgia passed away in April of 2016. She was 21 years old. She was a graduate of Lake Washington High School. I have to say she just graduated. She was doing drugs as a young teenager, and that affected her time in high school. Let me tell you, she was never going to be a brilliant academic, but certainly drugs affected her performance. And I can remember sitting at Key Arena on graduation day, still thinking they're probably not going to read out her name, and not quite believing it when they did. When my youngest son, Zach, he's 17, he's a junior at Lake Washington High School, and he heard I was doing this thing tonight. And he'd never expressed this to me before, but he said, I don't know what you can do, because you did everything you could for Georgia. And it was a revelation to me that that was his view of the world. And I started thinking about it, and I can remember, we're going to hear from Christy shortly, who does this fantastic work, and Georgia went to Youth Eastside Services way back when she was a young teenager, and one of the great things about that organisation is that it tries hard to involve the parents, and that can be difficult. There can be some difficult conversations with parents, and I'll come to that in more detail in a moment because of parents who are in denial. And then she went through detoxes, she went through rehabs. We covered the whole gamut. But there are things we can do. There are things we can do early on with our children. And as John indicates so clearly, randomness plays a role as well. And so if you're doing everything you can, then pray that good luck is also on your side and that your child is going to be okay. Because as parents, the death of your child is absolutely devastating. It diminishes you in a way that you really can't imagine until you've been through it, and the pain at times is unendurable. But I'm here with, despite that, some sense of confidence. I have 5 other kids, and I have to be a father to them as well. And you have to have confidence and optimism that things can be done. Could we go to maybe the first slide? Maybe it's the second slide, Mrs. Unfield. No, let's go back to that one. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But not only does the passing of a child affect a parent dramatically, it's what they go through when the child is an active addict. I remember going to one of George's rehabs in the Yakima area, and it primarily caters to young kids. And they have a weekend where they try and persuade the parents to come along and participate for a weekend in the various rehab activities that they undertake. And when you got all the parents together without the kids, one of the things that struck me was just how broke down some of them were. You know, they were kind of shuffling into the hall to sit down to talk about their kid who was in rehab for the 6th time. And the whole process had just broken them down. And, you know, that's one of the terrible byproducts that addiction causes in our community. So as you can see from what Janice just put up, over 70,000 people died from drug overdoses in the US in 2017, and opioids were involved in nearly 70% of those deaths. And John was talking about fentanyl. Fentanyl killed 81 people in Washington state alone in the first 6 months of last year. And it was responsible for 40% of drug overdoses in the US in 2017. I guess there's some good news in that there has been a decline in fentanyl overdoses since 2017. It's not a huge decline, but it's nevertheless a decline. But I say that guardedly because, as John will tell you, one drug just gets replaced by another. And that's the sad reality. But still, the fact of the matter is that fentanyl deaths have declined somewhat. So I want to talk briefly to you about the question that's probably in your heads, and that is, what can I do as a parent? And there are 3 things I'm going to briefly talk about. The first is don't be in denial. To be honest, this hall should be packed with parents, and the fact that it's not is because there are so many parents who are in denial. It's not going to happen to my kid. We're a nice people, we're a nice family, we live in a nice neighbourhood. We're far removed from the horror of illicit drugs, and you just need to look at those headlines that John put up to know that that's in fact not reality. Also, we feel shame as parents. You feel judged when your kids flunk out of class, don't get into the right college, if they get caught smoking weed at the school dance. We're ashamed. It's a natural emotional reaction. And how much more ashamed are we if they are drug addicts? And so you need to deal with that shame, you need to deal with the possibility of that shame and confront it. We're worried about what other parents will think or say behind our backs, or even to our faces. And we're uncomfortable asking or confronting, but even asking, even discussing with our children the issue of drugs and drug use. And all of this makes us close our eyes to the possibility that our child could be taking drugs. And I think it was Jim who was saying, be prepared to talk to your children. Recognise that they have been exposed to the reality of drugs. Every single one of your children has been exposed to the reality that drugs are available and that there are kids, probably that they know, who are taking drugs. And so you're not opening the door or somehow giving some revelatory information to them. They're already there. And so you need to talk about it. And then I think if you go to the next slide, let's keep on that one, but that's for a moment, I'll talk about it. One of the things to look out for are the signs, and John spoke about all the various drug paraphernalia. Girls, for instance, I don't know how it works, but they use squares of foil when they dye their hair, but they also use squares of foil to liquefy heroin and smoke from the smoke that's produced from the liquefaction. Spoons are used to cook heroin into a liquid for injection. Even a Gatorade bottle often doesn't just have Gatorade, but it's got alcohol as well. And as a parent, you need to be alive to these signs, and when you do see them, not automatically think, oh, well, the kid's just dyeing her hair, or that really is a bottle of Gatorade, or, it must have been a friend who left something behind. So I'm not encouraging overzealous surveillance. I'm not one of those parents, but it's not a good idea to close your eyes or be indifferent to what's going on around you. And then the second part of denial, and this is equally as important, and sometimes it's an uncomfortable discussion, is don't deny the kid's genetics. If you look at the statistics, they are utterly compelling, that where you have alcoholism and addiction in a family, the chances of a young member of that family being a drug addict or an alcoholic are increased exponentially. I mean, some figures say that, if you have one parent who is an alcoholic, you've almost got a 50% chance of being an alcoholic yourself. And you hear talk of it in terms of, anecdotal observations about, how the Irish are a bunch of drunks. But there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, if you want to look at presidents or vice presidents, go no further than Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Both those guys don't drink. They've never had a drink in their lives, but they know they come from families where drinking is a real problem. I mean, Joe Biden says that, he had a whole range of drunk uncles, and he decided early on that he might have that gene, whatever it is, or that genetic predisposition. It's probably not a single gene, and he decided he wasn't going to drink. And then, your old favourite Donald Trump, his brother, passed away as a result of alcoholism, and he will often talk about the fact that he observed that and he decided that he was never going to drink himself. And so if you have addiction and alcoholism in the family, then you need to confront the reality that your child, I'm sorry, uncomfortable though it is at a much higher risk. That's just the reality. And if that's the case, then you need to be doubly vigilant and really committed to doing whatever you can in that kid's environment to try and avoid ending up with an addict or an alcoholic. The second thing to do is to avoid being a bad model. And you can see that there. I've heard a lot of parents say, I let my kids drink at home with their friends because I know they'll be safe. I can keep my eye on them because they're at home. A lot of parents will drink with their children or offer them a little bit to drink. I know my dad used to say when I was a young kid, you know, you need to learn how to drink, and so we'll give you a little bit of wine, and that'll be a good thing. None of that is cool. It's not cool. It's not cool to drink with your parents. It's not cool to drink with your kids. It's not cool to allow kids in your house to drink. And it's really not cool to drink in front of your kids. It's not cool really to smoke in front of your kids. Despite what you may think, which is, you know, here's a child with its own free will, an independent being, I can tell them it's bad. In other words, I can say to them, do as I say, not what I do. So, you know, don't smoke, it's bad for you. Don't drink, it's bad for you. Don't take drugs, they're bad for you. But the kids will look at what you do. So try not to be a bad model for your kids. So I think I'm running out of time, but the second part of that is the tendency for some of us to, and for our children, to minimise drugs. So I remember Georgia always used to say to me all the time that weed is a lot less unhealthy than, say, Coca-Cola. Don't be a participant in that discussion, or I should say, don't be an affirmative participant in that discussion. Whatever the debate is about the physical addictive characteristics of weed, statistically, a lot of people who end up on hard drugs start on weed. And it develops an attitude, and the attitude is that I'm feeling bad and I want to do something about that, and the way to do something about that is to take some mind-altering drug to make me feel better. And even though weed may not be addictive, whatever the science ultimately comes down on that, the fact of the matter is that it is used by kids to make them feel better, and that can lead to using much more harmful drugs to make them feel better. Don't participate in the minimisation of how bad drugs are. And then the last thing I want to say is when you are talking with your kids, one of the ways to get through to them is to talk about your own experiences. And so I was saying that we have this disinclination to talk to our kids about drugs at all because we think somehow that might make them take them. It's a little bit like where, you know, kids may have suicidal ideation. You know, most counsellors and psychologists will tell you it's a mistake never to talk to them about whether or not they're having those thoughts. You should talk to them about it. It's not exactly the same with drugs, but it's similar. You should talk to them about it. But one of the best ways to do that often is to talk about your own experiences. So not only do you overcome, gee, I'm talking about drugs, but you then have to overcome the fact that you're admitting to your kid that you had some experiences with drugs yourself, if in fact you have. Even if it's alcohol, you can say, you know, I used to drink a lot when I was in college and I just found it didn't serve me. Or, if the truth is, and I found myself in some really bad situations, I blacked out. And so on, depending on what your experiences are. But most of us have some experiences we can draw on, even if it's not ourselves, but if it's others that we knew as younger people. And that's a way to get through to your kids, because you're sharing with them rather than telling them. You're sharing with them rather than telling them. I guess the biggest message that I want to leave you with is not to be in denial. It is out there. It does happen to the nicest people in the nicest homes with the nicest kids. And so it could tragically happen to you, and you need to be aware of that. Thanks very much.
Sorry about that. Knew I was going to have troubles with that, Nick, when you put it up there. So I'm Christy Nicholson, and I am the Director of School-Based Health Services for Youth Eastside Services. And so I'm going to kind of widen the lens a little bit here and talk about kind of the whole spectrum from prevention all the way down to intervention and treatment. But first, I want to kind of get a read, as we're all here working on our awareness. How many people's anxiety levels have been gradually creeping up? Put your hands up in the air if you found that to be true listening to this, right? Or just feeling the emotional impact because of thinking about either known losses or potential losses. I've actually worked in this field about 30 years. Vince dropped off a decade there. Thank you, Vince. But early on, really, I didn't experience where young people that I was working with died of accidental overdoses. And in the last 10 years, I can't count on my fingers anymore. So these are real people. So I think that that's a really important message. And they weren't necessarily, immoral people or as Nick was saying, I mean, some of them are very lovely people, very intelligent people, people with a lot of potential. So holding that awareness is not easy. So I always say to people, you need to have and is a word that we have a joke at YES where we do dialectical behavioral therapy, big mouthful, but it's about kind of regulating your emotions. But they use the word and instead of but, because but cancels things out. Well, I love you, but you really messed up on that. So I kind of took it away. So it's like, I love you, and I'm really worried about what you did there, and that's not okay. It's outside of the kind of rules of our family, so there's going to be a consequence to that. I'm feeling really anxious, and I'm working on developing some ways to manage that, to calm myself, because you all as parents, you have to have that. It's not only part of the modeling piece. So there's the not modeling the negative behaviors, but there's the modeling of the positive behaviors. I have alternative ways to take care of myself besides feeling bad and taking a substance. And that's really powerful because that's how children learn, is by imitation. That's something that's built into our brains, okay? So if you heard nothing else tonight, I want you to hear that. Awareness and how do I manage and take care of my fears and anxieties, because you have to, in order to be able to come alongside of your children and be able to have those conversations, be able to make those interventions, be able to have that relationship, which is key. So relationship, connection, modeling for your children and making sure that they learn alternatives to making themselves feel better when they feel bad. That's a natural instinct we all have. We want to be in balance, so if we're off balance, we want to kind of put it right. Some of us are more vulnerable from the beginning because we're genetically or whatever, we're born into the world. Some of us are a little bit more anxious by our temperaments or more inclined to depression. I have a daughter who's just a year out of college, and we have a family history, as Nick had talked about, of alcoholism and addiction on both sides of the family, so we did talk about that. In our home, we chose not to have alcohol and other substances, and our father and I had gotten past that point in our lives where, we were no longer smoking the cigarettes or trying out the drugs or doing the drinking. So we were past our struggle with that, because I don't mean to say I think that's easy. I don't think that's easy. And if you're trying to kind of wrestle with that for yourself at the same time that you are trying to support a child through that, that's really hard. So the next thing you need to know is you're not alone, and you need to, if you're feeling alone, find those people who support you. So we're really trying hard, kind of all of us from different places in the community, to come together and kind of weave together those kinds of paths of support and of building the awareness and then of building the skillfulness of parents and others to address those problems. So one of the ways in which I participate in that professionally is by overseeing a team of behavioral health support specialists in the schools. Yep, I got that slide up there, good. And this is a position that's somewhat unique. It was developed really to be able to respond to kids who had not only some risks for substance abuse or who had, okay, so I'm going to kind of walk a little bit of a path. So here we have kind of those building blocks of addictions and problems, which I really look at these as like, they're really not much different than, they look different, but really fundamentally, they're not that much different than a physical health problem or a disorder. So if you have, for example, maybe diabetes in your family, and there might be some genetic risks that are part of that. So this is one building block, is those genetics. The next building block is the environment. So when we're stressed, either from the outside or from the inside, so some of those coming with that more anxious temperament or the depression, and the outside part is life happens, and sometimes we don't have kind of full control over that. So there might be a lot of moves, there might be financial changes, there's a lot of things that can happen environmentally that lead to stress for the family and for the young person. So that's your second building block. The third building block is that exposure. And I think Jim and John were talking about that, where you, if you use a substance, if it's introduced into your brain and your body, and particularly when you're young and your brain and your body are still developing, brain up until the early 20s, it's like messing with the foundation of the house. So I used to say that to kids. It's like, okay, do you think it's going to be easier after this house is built if you have a messed up foundation you got to go back and fix, or it's one of those windows of the tippy top that's got a crack in it? And they kind of get that idea. And so we do talk about, that education piece around how big is your building block? Like, do you have the genetics? Kind of how stressful has your environment been, past, current? And what's your exposure been? And where do you have some choices here, right? Not a lot of choice about the genetics. Some choice around the environment. Some things have happened and you're not going to be able to change that. But you can start making choices now about what you expose to yourself and how you build your skills to take care of yourself. And you can make choices around what you are doing. So this is kind of the decision-making part of this for your child. So really important, that positive relationship, the feeling of connection, both for you and for your child. And it's not just the parent to the child, but it's also the parent to people at the school, those other kinds of adults. Where else are they connected in their community? Where else do they get sort of new experiences and excitement? Because young people need that. I mean, they're kind of wired for it. How else do they have those positive ways to feel better when they're sad or when they're angry? Can they calm themselves down? So thinking about these things. So again, we all got to admit, like, I had to do a lot of work when my daughter was growing up to kind of take that deep breath and work on my own aunt, and work on those things for myself to be able to kind of help her. And at the time, she dealt with a lot of anxiety. I was very blessed, particularly because of the work that I do, that my daughter did not develop a substance use disorder in her youth. I would like to think that had something to do with what I did or didn't do, but that may or may not be true. I think we do what we can, and we remain very hopeful for positive outcomes. And we also, in the end, there are some things that we can't control. We can try to respond to as best we can. So thinking about there's this prevention piece and this education piece, and then awareness says something's going on and something's wrong. This is called early intervention. So maybe people at school are noticing something, and maybe you. This is when you don't do the denial thing, where you kind of go, something's up. I'm going to kind of talk to some other people. I'm going to really pay attention. I'm going to try to talk to my child. So we have put in place to help you behavioral health support specialists in all of the secondary schools in Lake Washington and Bellevue School District. And so Rowan Crowder's here tonight. She is the behavioral health support specialist here and at Timberline. And they are equipped to address this whole spectrum. So that education piece, awareness piece, both for the parents, for the students, for the folks at school. Then they're working together in partnership with the school counselors and administration to, one, have a positive response to a discipline infraction around substance use, where they do an assessment and they see what would be helpful. What are the kind of problems here? What's underlying this? What kinds of alternatives do we need to put in place? How can we help this family get something happening that turns this child in a different direction sooner rather than later? Sometimes that doesn't happen, or it's not effective, and it's sort of like I say kind of to parents sometimes, if you were thinking about that physical illness, so back to the diabetes, first thing they're going to tell you is you need to try changing your diet and your lifestyle, right? Well, if that doesn't work, they're going to tell you, let's try a medication. And then they might try another stronger medication. And then you might have, some time in a hospital. So it's very much the same thing responding to a substance use disorder and really a mental health issue of any kind. And those two things come together. So one of the things we've done is train a behavioral health support specialist both with mental health treatment as well as substance use treatment. So they can work with both of those. So they're really then trying to look at what skills can I give this child? How can I teach them to better manage their sadness, their anxiety, their anger? How can we work to educate them about the risks around substances, so a lot of the things you've heard here, as well as make better decisions or make good decisions? And how can we sort of raise that awareness to their parents and then also give them parents tools so that they have that and they're not just freaking out? Because when you freak out, I don't know, Rowan, will you come up here for a second and help me out with something? And if you can move it to the next slide. Okay, so you might notice these things. This is like this part of the awareness thing, right? I'm going to spend a whole lot of time here, and you could see these signs and symptoms, but it might be that it means something else, but it probably means you should be concerned in finding out what's going on. And then if you go to the next slide. Okay, so this is about appreciating kind of the normalcy of being curious, and this is kind of an entry point for a lot of kids, and it is where it's important to have had the conversations and for them to know the possible risks. So for example, right now we're talking about, and I hope you do take some of those cards out there, they're from public health, about the fentanyl and the counterfeit opioid pills, and really talk to your kids about kind of, ooh, this is out here, and I've actually heard police officers say, this could be in anything, and it could be that bad batch, and it could be a fatal dosage, and you're not going to know. It could be the very first time you did it. Now, I usually used to use scare tactics on kids, but that's really scary, and it's a real thing, so I think that is important for us to say that. But some of these might be other troubles and things like that, and I don't want to make these into being kind of negative things. They're just things to be aware of that say your child might be struggling. I'll go to the next one. Okay, so if you see that, stay calm and state your concern. So that's, again, take your own deep breath first and figure out kind of, what's the best way I could come at this? Because, for example, come here, Rowan. Rowan's going to pretend to be my, 14-year-old. Rowan, what were you doing last night? What is this stuff I found in the room? I told you not to do that. No. What is it? What is it? What's going on? How are you going to respond to me? Okay, and where are you going to want to go right now? That way? Or are you going to come on over here, right? Okay. So here's another example. Okay. So here we are. We're just kind of hanging out. Maybe we're in the car. Maybe we're just walking to the car. I don't know, we're in the kitchen, whatever. Chop some lettuce for me, would you? And I say, man, I happened to read or hear, or I went to this thing and they were talking about fentanyl and kids using opioids and people dying, all kinds of crazy stuff. It really kind of freaked me out. You heard anything like that about stuff going on at your school? I'm mixing the stew here. Yeah? Heard anything about that? A little bit? Oh, okay. Yeah. I brought some of this stuff home. It's kind of out on the dining room table out there. You could kind of pick it up later. But you worried about any of your friends with that kind of stuff? A little bit? Okay. Who do kids talk to at your school if that stuff's going on? Okay, all right, okay, good. I'm glad there's somebody there for them to talk to. What do you think I should kind of know about that? It really kind of freaked me out. Okay, good. No, I'm glad you're not doing it because, you know, I really care about you and I would not want, you know, to lose you or have something like that happen. But on the other hand, if you ever were doing that or you had questions about it or something like that, I really want you to be able to kind of come and tell me. And I will be upset about it, I'll be honest, you know kind of how I am, but I'm not going to love you any less, you know? Hey, thank you, Ron. So just a little demonstration, and you can do this, and part of that is the beginning is building that relationship, having the courage to talk about it, just kind of exploring. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, things you've heard already, talk about it. One thing about the consequences, just real quick, that I think is useful is that we reinforce what we pay attention to. So if what we're paying attention to is behavior we don't like, which is oftentimes when we're afraid, we fall into, it's like, so now you take that deep breath again. Okay, gotta stop that, all right. Okay, so I'm gonna have to deal with my fear some other way. But what you want to do is you want to have laid down, these are my expectations, or these are the family expectations, or we'll talk together about what do you think you need to do around, you know, curfews. Let's come to some kind of agreement with each other, which is going to be led by you. You're the parent, okay? And then you look at what are going to be the consequences. You set those down. You don't have to talk about those again. You just have to go, dude, sorry, you know, you came in like an hour past curfew. I was really worried, so, you know, the consequence is that, you know, you don't get to go out anywhere for the next week, you know, whatever that kind of thing is. And you're done with that. And then you're free to kind of, you hang out and do other stuff. You can notice something great that they did. Okay, just some strategies, okay? All right, we can skip this one. And the Good Samaritan Law, I just want to make sure you go home and tell your kids about that. If they don't know about it, I hope they know about it because our behavioral health support specialists tell everybody about it. Get help. You won't get prosecuted. All right, I don't think I have just resources here next for you. And I'm going to pass this off to Stephanie from Changes, which is a group that we often refer parents to as part of that not being alone.
Thank you, Christine. So I am Stephanie Mannion, and I have been the president of Changes Board of Directors, and I'm an active member of Changes since July 2011, and I attend the Redmond chapter, which is at the Redmond Community Center. Put this back in here. So Changes is a 501c3, and it was founded almost 24 years ago, but we like to say that we're the best kept secret around. I'm here to introduce a lifeline to parents who are struggling with kids who are displaying defiant and self-harming behaviors. The behaviors that we've been talking about tonight already certainly qualify as defiant and self-harming, but Changes casts a larger net over the categories, so I have listed some of the other behaviors as well. You can see them up there, but sullen, poor attitude, failing in school or work, disrespect, running away, breaking the law, drug and alcohol use, addiction issues, which also involve addiction to gaming and internet, gang involvement. Yes, we do have gangs around here. Demanding entitlements, depression and suicide, cutting, burning, and violence. Violence also doesn't mean just violence outside the house, but a surprising number of kids engage in domestic violence that parents are unsure how to respond to. If you're seeing any of these behaviors from your child, especially if they've been going on for some time, chances are you may be experiencing any one or more of these feelings. Shame, anger, depression, sadness, bewilderment, frustration, numbness, disapproval, guilt, fear, loneliness, isolation, betrayal, and panic. If life is good regarding your kids, then this group is definitely not for you. But I encourage you to keep us in your back pocket and possibly refer to us to a friend that might be struggling. I'd like to tell you a little bit of my story. This is my son, and I in California 2 years ago. He lives there now and is fully self-supporting. I really didn't think that was going to ever be possible. 8.5 years ago, I can tell you that I was feeling every one of those shameful, awful feelings that I listed on any given day. I wasn't sleeping or eating. I was totally enmeshed in my son's life, desperate to get him to change what he was doing. My son was engaging in all but one of those behaviors that I know of. My husband and I were working hard to save him from himself, and at the same time arguing about what to do and how to do it. We tried bribing, we tried punishing, we tried begging and pleading, talking, more talking. We tried grounding, we tried family therapy, we tried individual therapy for him, we tried individual therapy for us. We engaged the help of Youth Eastside Services. We worked with school guidance counselors, with school resource officers, with the truancy officer, but nothing was working. Our family was falling apart. After finding evidence of suicide ideation on the computer, we met with CORS, which is the Children's Crisis Outreach Resource System, to make a suicide prevention plan. There was a parent advocate there that day. After 3 hours of making a suicide plan, she told us about a parent support group that happened to meet at the Old Redmond Schoolhouse. By our good fortune, it was that night. Of course, we attended. After spending 15 minutes with the other parents in that room, we felt understood, we felt supported, and for the first time in 3 years, we had hope. So how does Changes help? Changes offers support and education to empower parents. Changes helps parents change their behavior to change their family dynamics. What you have been doing is not working. It's time to try something else. Changes helps plan and work through challenging situations. On a weekly basis, we meet and have chapter meetings. We go over what happened that week and what possibly can happen the next week. We encourage parents to slow down and disengage from conflict. We learn that we don't have to give an immediate response to our child. If the child needs an answer now, the answer is no. We help parents determine the ownership of the problem. We figure out whose problem is it, and we get out of the way and let kids figure things out for themselves. We allow natural consequences. Everyone learns by doing. The other thing I can tell you about Changes is that it doesn't work overnight. Changes is not an emergency fix. It's a process of changing yourself. The reason this is so effective is that it is a peer-to-peer support system. The parents helping you have been through and may currently be going through the same or similar situations and experiences. Changes parents give back more than they receive. So how could you get involved with Changes? It's easy. You start by going to a meeting. We have weekly meetings at the Redmond Community Center. Any night the community center is open, on Tuesdays, we are there. We address weekly what you've experienced last week and what's coming up for you. We have mentors. For the first 6 weeks that you come, somebody is assigned to you to help you through the program. You can call them 24/7 to answer questions about the program or to help you think, plan, act around any situation that might be happening. We have family teams. This is truly the most magnificent part of this organization. Individual family teams are formed, and they can help you make an individual long-term plan for your unique family. Think, Plan, Act is something that we use in order to encourage parents to not react to what their kids are doing, but to really slow down and think and plan so that we don't have a negative outcome. We have stands and small steps. Stands is like a goal, and the only way to reach a worthy goal is by small steps, and parents help you every step of the way. Court and support. Court and support is when somebody can go with you to any type of high anxiety time, such as attending court with your child. They can be a second set of ears, and they can help you process the situation when it's over. We have a 24-hour, 7-day phone or text support list. At any time, you can call someone to help. Part of our meeting is a community education piece. We've had a lot of these people at our meetings, including school counselors, community program reps, police, and truancy officers. Changes meetings are weekly. They're 2 hours. They take place in Seattle, Redmond, and Everett. They're free. We do ask for a donation, and they're confidential. Whatever is talked about at the meetings stays within the meetings. The closest meeting for you is at Marymore Business Park. It's near the Whole Foods, right off the back of Marymore. And the last slide is just our information. The information line for any questions, and our website has a lot of more information. We have a lot more tools and resources than I mentioned, and I encourage you to come to a meeting to find out, or to encourage a friend. Thanks.
I want to thank our panel tonight, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. And one of the most important things, I think, overall for you to take away from this is that you are a prime influencer to your children. Don't let culture, don't let your friends, don't let your friends make you feel as though you're redundant, your kids are beyond you, or you're out of touch, or anything like that. You need to realize that you are your child's #1 influencer, and you will always be. I'm like 50 something, and if my mom started doing something weird tomorrow, she's in her 80s, it would affect my life. It just never ends. So don't buy into that lie that your voice doesn't matter, that some YouTube influencer or something on TikTok is speaking louder into your kids' lives than you are. That's not true. It's not true. You're your kid's #1 influencer. As a pastor and chaplain in our community, there's 2 things that I have seen consistently across the board that makes for a balanced, healthy life, and it's communication, open communication, which you've heard a lot about here, and it's community. Realizing that you are not alone, realizing that your kids are not facing unique problems, that these things can be dealt with, and they can be best dealt with a team. At Lakeside, in our youth group, we model our youth ministry in a team concept, and I've seen it work. Teens encouraging other teens to make wise and healthy choices, and communicating and affirming those good choices makes all the difference. And then working with community and parents, and as these groups have mentioned here with Connections and YES, that it is about working together, not working against, but working together and looking for areas of commonality. So I encourage you, when you leave here tonight, you may be thinking, I don't need this, or maybe I've got a friend that needs this. Grab the information on your way out and take it with you tonight. But I want you to take a moment, if you haven't already, and take those 3x5 cards and give us your top 3 concerns that you have as a parent, and on your way out, Irene will gladly catch those from you, because that will help us inform our next panel. And I want to give a special thanks to the Lake Washington School District PTSA and especially Irene for making this happen tonight. But again, thank you for your time tonight, your patience, and being with us with a little technical issues here at the beginning. But pass the word for the next panel for other parents to be here. As Nick said tonight, the room really should be full. Anyway, have a great evening, and thank you again for being here with us tonight.